one of the basic things that I want to ask about the index that we released is that do you see a difference when you were a member of the planning commission and now have companies more compliant towards being more transparent and disclosing information that to the public at large? So,
There's a very slow and slight change in the last few years of companies becoming voluntarily more responsible and accounting to citizens. This framework is part of the National Voluntary Guidelines that were developed by the participation of industry, CI, and many other organizations, as well as civil society organizations and some development organizations, and the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, that's the government's wing. So it was collectively done, voluntary guidelines for business to voluntarily take responsibility for things which are outside the usual corporate governance, which is accounting to your shareholders and to your investors about what you've done with their money. The voluntary guidelines are about accounting to citizens for the resources used of the community, land, water, public health, and damage to public health, and so on. It's been very slow. And one of the reasons why it has been slower than it would have been is that at the same time as these national voluntary guidelines were developed participatively by stakeholders with business themselves suggesting the guidelines, government introduced a 2% CSR scheme. Now that's a very easy thing because 2% of my profit is a small amount of my profit. If I spend it and account for it at the end of the year, then whatever I have done to get my revenues and make my profit, if I've damaged the environment, if I've not taken care of the health of the workers in the community or in my factory and so on, I'm forgiven. It's like I live in the week very badly, make a lot of money for myself, doing maybe corrupt things, and at the end of the week I go for half an hour to the temple and I give some chanda, my 2% CSR, and I'm all right. And so what has happened is by focusing the attention of the business itself as also the community on, if they give you chanda in the temple, they must be good people. Yeah. I think we have just slowed down the movement for responsible business. So in fact, I do feel that we have to kill CSR so that business responsibility can grow.
So one of the factors that one of the critics say that CSR is a way of laundering money as well. I mean, that has also been one of the criticism against CSR, that they establish their own NGOs, corporates have their own NGOs. I mean, there's no real way of finding out whether that goes into...
Yeah, that is why, yes, you see, every society has limited capacity. Yeah. We have limited financial capacity, of course, but we also have limited institutional capacity, government capacity, institutional in terms of the ability of people to come to agreements, that capacity. So we must use our limited capacity for the right things. So if we waste our capacity on trying to improve the wrong things, then we don't have capacity for the right things. The wrong things are this whole idea that if you spend money, then you're doing good to society. It's not true. It's how you make the money which says whether you're good for society or bad for society. So now saying is that what the 2% should be spent on, how you should account for it, how we are going to make sure that the 2% that you spend it on is kosher or not. I mean, we're wasting so much energy about that, as I say, 0.2% of your revenue, because if you make 10% of your revenue into profit and 2% you spend is 0.2%. The 99.8% is my activity. How I use the land, how I use people, how I mine. That's what I'm doing to the environment and to society. That's 100% of my revenue comes out of those activities. That 0.2% activity, why is wasting so much time on it to do that? So this is, as you probably be hearing, you heard this morning at the discussions, I think thoughtful people, both on the business side and certainly on the civil society side, are saying just this. Please, let's focus on what does business responsibility mean. Then responsible businesses say, okay, I understand it, because in fact I've suggested it should be so, and I'm going to account for it. So the accounting should be on business responsibility, not on 2% CSR.
Also, do you believe that with the establishment of Niti Ayog, you must have heard Amitabh's speech as well?
Well, there's a bit worrying there, because Amitabh has to rightly say that, we must have growth so that we can have resources. All right. He did give the example of Kerala, a state he's very familiar with, where he says the health and education has been ahead of the rest of the country. Well, all that time, Kerala was a communist state. China improved health and education before it had its economic reforms at a time when it was very communist. So the caring for the basic things of people, it doesn't come naturally in free markets and to businesses. It is something which government and governance of societies must take responsibility for. So growth means, and growth of what? We're not just talking of growth of corporate profits. We're talking about growth of improvement of health, growth of improvement of education, growth of people's happiness, growth of people's feeling that it's a fair society. I mean, those are the good qualities that we want improved in societies. So to say that we are progressing, to just have growth of GDP, which doesn't measure any of those things, is not a measure of the improvement of society at all, you see. So I do worry that until in the public discourse and in the government too, we change the primary measure of the progress of the country from GDP to something else, something broader than just GDP, we are not going to be keeping our eye on the ball. It's a distraction otherwise. Just like 2% CSR is a distraction, focusing just on GDP is a distraction for what we really need to do.
So you would suggest that the best thing to do is to get rid of CSR now and bring
Well, I'm saying it in an exaggerated fashion, and I've been saying this for the last 7-8 years. In fact, at the time when it was being mooted in the government, and I was just joined the government, and I did say as a caution that, I can imagine the next 6-7 years, we'll have so much of our attention focused on this, and we'll be losing time for something that we did, which was a good thing, which we're saying the National Voluntary Guidelines, which is what we're celebrating. And the reports here are confirming, the ones that are being put out this morning for the second year, conform to the framework of the National Voluntary Guidelines. Let's pay more attention to that. Yeah? And then we'll get everybody aligned to say, that's the goal, that's the method, we've got it, let's go ahead with it.
So one of the examples that you were stating today, that some companies were unaware of what was going on in their own factories.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
Do you what is, I mean?
That was a very interesting point, when I was in the planning commission and I was responsible for industry, which has not been growing in India, manufacturing and industry, which is why we're not getting enough jobs in the country. So my brief was given to me by Dr. Manmohan saying that since I'm a man from industry, I've never worked in government, I've worked all my life, 40, 50 years in industry and consulting to industry, please, we have to think differently about how to grow industry. Now, in growing industry, I know that the people who grow industry are your own talent, your own employees. I mean, they have the ideas and they have the passion, they are the resistance to change, and they are also the force that can help to make change in what's happening in your industry. So unless your employees are seen as the assets of your organization, and by the way, they are the only assets that have the ability to improve themselves. Improve themselves, and they can improve the systems of your company also. Your machines are declared as assets on your balance sheet, they can't improve themselves and they can't improve anything else. Your inventories are declared as assets on your balance sheet, they don't improve themselves and cannot. Human beings are never shown as assets, they're shown on the profit and loss account, right? Too many human beings, too much cost. So we have got a mindset about, cutting them down if we can, because then our profits do improve, whereas they are the means to improve the utilization of all the assets of the organization. So this is a thesis. So I said, I do know that in India there are some companies like Tata's was mentioned today and a few others who have this orientation at the top and their managers. Let's look at a period of the last 10 or 15 years. Which companies in this country have got sustained profit improvement for 10, 15 years. And let's contrast them with others in the same industries who otherwise look very glamorous and stock prices may today be high, but what has been the track record in terms of sustained growth? And so we got Bain and Company, who are hard capitalists, to say, this is my thesis, this is, don't believe this. I said, but go look out, do the research in India. Look at 4 or 5 sectors we took, look at a set of companies in each of the sectors and compare them and see which ones have the most sustained growth. Then see their practices, see the orientation of management, you're interviewing them, look at their practices on the shop floor and see if there's a correlation between those who think about their employees as assets and their sustained growth, and those who are managing very well in terms of their costs and other strategies and see. And they came back surprised. How come that those companies who think of the employees as assets and got these practices on the ground, they seem to be consistently doing better than the others. So there you are. So you got, data to prove it. But now in that study they found, you see, that in some of these good companies, the ones that I said had this great orientation towards the employees generally, they said that they've got also, like the other 60-70% of their workers are contract workers. Now, this is shocking because you can have contract workers for the sake of the variability in your production. If you're in an industry like textiles, the seasonal, one can understand that it goes up in one season and low in other. If you are producing motorcycles or automobiles, there is some variations, 10 or 15% through the year. You may need to have 10 or 15% employees who are on some flexible basis. Why do you need 70%? So as they went in, they found that a few other things, you see, which were the worrying things, that these contract employees weren't getting wages on time because they are through a contractor. They weren't being provided safety equipment because they're not our employees and we're not matching the number of helmets given to the number of employees. We don't know. And so this was extremely worrying. And of course, the wages that they were getting were a fraction, 1/3, 1/4, what other workers were getting who were working alongside them for years doing the same work. So this is inequitable. It's bad for human beings to be working in unsafe practices. It's unfair that they don't get their wages on time, and grossly inequitable that they're not paid the same wages. So this Bain company said, sir, the very companies you said you admired, and they have proven the point about appreciating assets, but inside their own company some very bad practices have been developing the last few years. They've got so many contract workers, and this is the condition. So I gave it to these companies through CI. First I was shocked. No, can't be. We are this. We've invented the new laws before they became laws. All this about Tatas and philanthropy and Godrej and so on. But I said, you look for yourself. When they looked, and they very sheepishly said, we are shocked. So I said, that's it. You always got to be looking and asking your own stakeholders. If you don't treat your contract workers as stakeholders, they are working and producing your profits. So defining your stakeholders as employees means on your roll and not workers is the first big mistake you're making. They're right inside giving their lives, and we heard today of giving their limbs sometimes for you. Then you can talk about what I did for the village outside. And yes, you got good stories about how we helped a village and helped to get the Dalits in some village, which is good things. But start where, as I said, charity begins at home. You look after your own family, your own limbs. They are your own limbs also, right? So this is where then the waking up came. That it's, managements are out of touch with what's happening in the world. Right under their noses, in their own organizations, what's happening in the world around them. Around them, the feeling that, people admire us because we are, profit making. We are seen on the covers of magazines as in Davos and so on. And so, but when you got the surveys done like by Pew and by the World's Values survey, and now recently by Edelman, and they say actually you business leaders are not so trusted. They're shocked. In 2000 in Davos, it opened that conference with the managing director of the World Economic Forum giving to all the people a survey done, organized by the World Economic Forum through these other good survey organizations of how much people trusted business, these people. It said that in 2000, that generally in all countries, the public doesn't trust business that much. But we kept celebrating and giving business more freedom in the financial sector in the US because, they are the leaders and creators of growth. But look what's happened. Now we get Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, even in the US, saying these fat cats influencing Washington, we've got to take care of them. And it's happening in our country too. It's happening all over Europe right now. So I think business leaders have to open their minds and listen. You've got to listen to people who are not like yourself. Otherwise you keep listening to your peers and you begin to believe in that echo chamber that we are all right.
So do you believe by the time the next index comes out, do you see improvement in any of these factors?
See, this is a very good question. I'll answer it always like a scientist. That if I've got a good model which says that if this is done, then that is going to happen, then I concentrate then on if this is being done, then I know that is going to happen. So in this situation of making business feel more responsible and acting more responsible, the first thing, as I said, is getting business to focus its attention on listening to its stakeholders getting its own data about its own stakeholders' conditions. This includes the community, of course, and the environment on that, and making its own plans of what it's going to do about it. Yeah? And if we keep measuring for a few more years, are they doing this or not, then we are likely to get more results. If we don't do this, then I can tell you we're not going to get the results because the model holds. And that's, I think, what's been happening the last 6-7 years. We've not been focusing on putting business into the seat of its own responsibilities. Okay? And otherwise, I said, allowing them to donate at the temple every week and saying, very good, thank you, your donation has gone up, you must be all right.
So do you think any specific sector, I mean, you looked at industry, so I mean, the index shows us that PSU have been largely compliant in at least giving out information, if nothing else. But any specific, if it's the pharma industry or oil and gas, anything?
No, I'll tell you something, truly. The public sector undertakings are administered by government ministries. So in terms of procedural compliance, they'll always so. The private sector can keep fighting to say, I'm private, why should I give this information? You don't have a right to it. So the public sector chief executive might also feel, so as a business I shouldn't be expected to do this, but the ministry will say so. So compliance, they will always be, in terms of paper compliance, likely to be ahead of the other side. But it turns out that they come like ticking the boxes actually. In terms of contract labor, for example, which as I said we went into, the problem with the public sector undertakings is as bad as it is in the private sector. Government itself is the largest employer of contract labor. So, don't also begin to say that public sector is, in terms of such practices, better than, or the government is better on such practices than the private sector. So, all employers, whether you're a government employer, a public sector employer, or a private employer, have to say, my stakeholders are the people who work and enable my institution to produce its results. What are the conditions of the people who work here? We had a fine example mentioned by Mrs. Joseph about HelpAge India. It's an NGO with 1,000 employees. An NGO is not making profits. And otherwise, if you take the view that until you make profits, I can't do good. Until I grow GDP, I can't take care of health. That's a wrong view. There are people who are your means. They're part of you. You have to look after them while you are doing your work and making a profit. She said that organization of 1,000, it has provident fund and health insurance for everybody. Last chaprasi to the top. Everybody. So they can do it. So don't say it's a cost. And we found in the contract labor studies that Bain did all over, the prime reason that these companies are not willing to change so quickly is that actually they save a lot of cost. The contract labor is paid, like I said, 1/2 or 1/3 sometimes of the regular worker. So 70% of your people paid 1/3. So your labor cost is less. But that's treating it like a revenue problem, cost and profit problem, rather than, as I said, a human being and an asset issue over here. So it's not a big cost problem, by the way. So we are dwelling at the moment, like you're saying about on the labor side, it's not a cost problem. Similarly, in doing the right thing, by not damaging the environment, it's never a cost problem. It's not how much money you need to. So don't tell me, it costs a lot to be responsible. I assure you that for sustainability, it costs you a lot not to be responsible, because you will die, your business will die.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for being with us.